people have two sides to them. Anyway, there's this like real fancy book that's like $500. It's like a antique book that whenever I go to the last bookstore in Los Angeles, I'm always like, yo, let me see that book. And they're like, we know you're not gonna buy it. And I'm like, yeah, let me see that book though. So that's mine. Anybody else got books? Where's the chat? Where's the chat at? Drop if you got, what's some books that I need to read? Any books that you've read, Georgia, by the way, that you've enjoyed recently?
Yes, I've read a couple books recently that I've enjoyed. We're gonna get started. We're gonna let folks trickle in a little bit longer and we'll get started in just a couple minutes. The book I just finished was The Water Dancer by Coates. And that was good. It was his first book of fiction. And
The Water Dancer.
The Water Dancer, yeah. It was good.
You know what I just read that I really liked? I read Grace Lee Boggs' autobiography, Living for Change. Amazing. Did you know Grace Lee Boggs, for folks that don't know, incredible Asian American activist out of Detroit, Michigan, is where she did most of her work. Did you know, so she's Chinese American. Her parents are immigrants from China. I think she may have been born in China. No, I think either she was born in the United States, one of her siblings, it's like one of those things where like older one was born in China as they were kind of immigrating to the United States. And that she was so down for Black Panthers that when the FBI was describing her in her FBI file in the 1970s, that there's a line where they said she must be Afro-Chinese because that was the only way that they could explain why she was so invested in the Black Power movement in Michigan. Like they were just like, oh, she must be Black. They were just gonna say like that must be the explanation for it. It's an incredible autobiography. I highly recommend it. Grace Lee Boggs. It was called Living for Change. Amazing book. We got 15 folks in. We're just going to wait a couple minutes, make sure everybody gets a chance to trickle in. People are going to be here on the Zoom and also on the Facebook Live. So we've got two different audiences kind of hanging out. Happy Friday, y'all. Thanks for joining us. This is our second going out into the streets training. So excited to have folks. We'll get started probably in about 4 more minutes. That feel good for you, Georgia? 4 minutes? Don't you do that. Ugh. Yeah, it's awesome. We got lots of folks coming in. How's the weather? Is it warm up there, Georgia, by the way? You're in Oakland. I'm in Los Angeles.
It was kind of cool this morning. It was real hot yesterday, but it's yeah, it's warming up now. Warming up now.
I'm generally confused by most weather related things. I download, look, here's my deal. This is why I don't trust weather apps. It was raining. I was confused. I went to my weather app and it was like, no, it's cloudy and it's not raining at all. And I was like, no, I'm actually feeling water on me. I downloaded, Georgia, 4 weather apps. They all said it wasn't raining right now. I was like, this is clearly a scam.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, let's get started.
Ready?
Yeah. Yeah, I think let's get started and we'll just pause as folks come in and go from there. So welcome everybody and to our friends on Facebook. This is, like Erin said, our second session that we've run of this particular workshop. And I just wanted to start saying some things that it is and some things that it isn't. And then we'll turn it over to Erin to kind of ground us in a little bit more of the moment. I had far too many tabs open. That's my other problem. Great. So yeah, so what we wanted to do is we wanted to provide a space in the kind of revolutionary radical practice of Frailty Myths, which really calls us to be our whole selves, calls us to the moment. Erin's going to talk a little bit more about who Frailty Myths is and what we do in a second. But just to say that we're going to be talking about demonstrations, about what it means to protest, some tips, some things to consider, some things to take, some things to expect. But before we get into any of that, I really wanted to just lift up that all demonstrations, all protests are different. So as a general rule, it's good to think about what to expect and what to consider so you can prepare yourself. But we also really want to step into this space with this respect and into the protest spaces, the demonstration spaces with respecting the variety and the depth of knowledge and the lived experience of all the folks in this virtual room and all the folks that we're on the street with, which is to say, like, some people are radicalized at a moment in their lives. Some people become activists, and other people, activism isn't about choice. It is just a lived experience. It is just a lived reality. And so really, and all of those things are okay. And so, but just, we want to walk with that knowledge and that respect, and honoring the lived and generational knowledge that people have. And also that this list and today is by no means exhaustive. So we're not going to touch on every possibility. And it is also not a judgment or a value on certain strategies and tactics. So we're trying to say, like, if X, then Y, consider. But that doesn't necessarily mean that we are endorsing or not endorsing. So we're going to talk about a couple different eventualities and possibilities. And just to say, we're not here to judge people's political tactics or people's political strategies. And Frailty Myths comes from the point of assumption that people make decisions that they have thought about, rather than the point of assuming that people were not intentional in their actions. So just to name that. And then lastly, this is not a list to say things that will always happen or even that will often happen, just things that could happen and ways to manage expectations and to consider possible outcomes rather than a how-to or a one-size-fits-all. So that's what we're doing today. And also, we believe at Frailty Myths that it is important to love, to have joy, to find moments to celebrate. And we can do that and hold each other while staying really grounded in the seriousness and the profoundness and the importance and the tragedy of this moment, which is not to be overlooked in any of that love or joy. So lots of crunchy, complex things to hold at once. And that is the journey of humanness. So Erin, I will turn it over to you.
Thank you. I was trying to tell you to unmute me, but I was muted. It was a Faustian dilemma that I was in there. Thank you so much, Georgia. Super excited to be here. Super excited for everyone to join us here on Zoom, also on our Facebook audience. Really excited for folks that are excited to get out there, to get excited to change the world. So like Georgia said, we wanted to start off with just telling folks who we were at Frailty Myths, and then just have a little conversation to kind of set the mood, set the tone, if you will. So for folks that don't know, maybe folks that have met or haven't met Frailty Myths before, just some quick details about who we are, because we've got a lot to get through today. So Frailty Myths is a 501c3 nonprofit. We're based out of California. That's where our 501c3 is. But we work across the United States and around the world. And our mission is to inspire a new generation of women, trans, and gender nonconforming folks to smash the myth of frailty and transform the world around us. We are a come when called organization. So that means that we come into communities when they ask us to come, and we teach free and low cost workshops on self-reliance, strength, and power to marginalized communities. And we also redirect institutions and organizations into transforming their workplaces into diverse and just communities. So that's who we are. Georgia and I have been best friends since college. It's been about 15 years. So facts, shout out to my best friend. And yeah, that's who we are. That's what we do. We've been in operation now for a little bit over 4 years. And so now what I wanted to do, just to set a little bit of a container here, is to talk about hopefully what has all brought us to this room. And that is a really frank conversation about race and racism in the United States. And this note is especially for our white friends and comrades out there who are really just heading out to their first protest ever. I really want people to think about why we're here. And I know that's a question that kind of is being asked now, but I really want people to like really take the time and consider what we are doing and the seriousness behind that. And just for folks to know, I'm not going to sit here and talk about the ways in which I have been impacted by a Black woman and like replay my grief and trauma for you in this moment to get you to empathize with what Black folks in communities of color and marginalized communities are going through. Not gonna do it. I think that folks should develop empathy and folks should develop support in your heart. And I think that that is something that will happen not through me taking you through a theater of oppression of my life. But I want folks to understand that white supremacy, capitalism, and state-sanctioned violence are directly impacting Black communities and marginalized communities here in the United States and all over the world, frankly. And I really want to ask people to take the time to think about our own privilege and the sacrifices that other people have made for us to be in this moment right now, having this conversation. And with that being said, I think that there are some questions that people can ask themselves or people can ask others when they're beginning to ask these questions about who should be here and not who should be here, but how I should be here and what it should look like when I show up. So here are just a few, not all, but a few questions that you might want to ask yourself, especially for, like I said, our white friends and our folks that are our friends that are coming maybe to a protest for the first time. So here's the first question that you might want to ask yourself. Do I need to be at the front of the march? This is a horrible quiz because I'm going to give you the answer. No. The answer is no to that question. You do not need to be at the front of the march. It's okay. It's okay to be in the back. Should I be the person that has the megaphone or the microphone? Again, horrible quiz. Answer, no. You should not be the person that is on the megaphone or on the microphone. Allow folks that are leaders, allow people that are young folks, marginalized folks, people that have been in the movement to take the lead, take the megaphone and lead people. Again, kind of a similar question, but should I be leading in chants? No. Take the opportunity to learn a new chant. Perhaps you'll learn a new chant in a whole new different language, an amazing moment that you'll have. Don't lead, listen. Final question, do I need to smash windows? That is a trick question, maybe. Ask yourself, that's another one, just ask yourself. All of these questions are about asking yourself, how much space do I take up in this moment? And the answer hopefully should be minimal. Minimal is always the answer. Big questions that you want to ask yourself. Am I prioritizing Black leadership at the march, at the action, in my life? Am I listening to Black folks as they talk about these issues? Am I prioritizing local leadership, young voices, folks, like I said, that have already been in this moment before? And the last thing that I really want to challenge people on is a lot of people recently have been talking about this conversation about allyship. We really heard this around the Women's March. People really talking about, I want to be a good ally. I'm gonna put on my safety pin. I'm gonna do it. And I really want to challenge people in this moment to shift from being an ally to being an accomplice. There's an incredible group out there, the Indigenous Action Media Group, that put together an article called Accomplices Not Allies, Abolishing the Ally Industrial Complex. I'll put the link to the article in the chat. And there are a few things that they mention that talk about the difference between being an ally and being an accomplice. So an accomplice, I'll just mention a couple of them. An accomplice listens with respect. An accomplice isn't motivated by personal guilt or shame. An accomplice doesn't just have our back, they have our side, using their privilege in their own spaces to confront and unsettle white supremacy and colonialism. And finally, accomplices are building relationships with the movement through mutual consent and building trust. So I really hope that folks take this moment, like I said, to really dig deep and to think authentically about why we're here, who's helped us be here, and who we can listen to help move this movement forward. So Georgia, you want to talk about what we can expect and maybe not expect when we head out to our first protest ever?
I would love to. Thanks for all of that, Erin. Super appreciate it. And to say, so if you're watching on Facebook, put your questions in the chat group there. If you're on Zoom, put your questions in the chat box here. We'll try to get to all of the questions, and we'll stop between each section to answer questions to the best of our ability. And also to say at Frailty Myths, we really, our revolutionary practice, like I said, is to lift up that we don't need to be experts to share our knowledge, lift up the collective wisdom of our community, and also to reject the ideas of franticness, of perfectionism that white supremacy have instilled in so many of the cultural elements of our current world. So we're really trying to think about what, as we smash patriarchy and as we smash white supremacy, what are we building in its place? And that's the work, that's the revolutionary practice of Frailty Myths, is really building up what that world looks like, step by step, and being willing to sit with that discomfort and be in those complicated conversations. So with that, some things to expect and some things not to expect. And just again, this is not an exhaustive list. But kind of like what Erin said, anytime you go out into the streets, familiarize yourself with the issue and who is called for the demonstration. That will help you in the process of what you're thinking about as it relates to expectations. Know what you're demonstrating, know what you're going out in the streets for and why, and have a moment with yourself to really sit with that and be grounded in that. Expect that when you arrive, that there will be, expect people with a range of opinions and political ideologies. So, and even if all of the folks there agree with one thing, you should still expect that within that there will be quite a range of ideologies and opinions, many of which might be different from yours. And that is an important expectation. You should expect some degree of chaos. So people have different relationships with chaos. And again, no judgment on that, but it is important to think about what your relationship with chaos is and know that you should expect some degree of it. Expect undercover cops and provocateurs. So undercover cops are police officers that are dressed in plain clothes, oftentimes tie-dye shirts and really clean sneakers is an indication. But, you know, I think tie-dye is having a second moment or a third moment or maybe a fourth moment. So I don't want to direct any hostility at our folks into tie-dye, but know that there are police officers dressed in plain clothes, oftentimes in the crowds, and you should expect also that there are provocateurs. So provocateurs are people that are intentionally trying to distract or disrupt the demonstration, cause trouble. That does not mean that anyone that is doing something that you might not agree with or doing something that you might consider violent or unstrategic is a provocateur. So it is consistent with lots of people's politics and ideologies to destroy property. And we are not here to make a judgment on that. Happy to have that conversation in a different space, but just so we want to be really clear that just because someone is engaged in property destruction does not make them a provocateur. It is a both and kind of situation. Expect counter protesters. So like undercover cops and provocateurs, you should also expect counter protesters. And in addition to that, counter protesters, sometimes their sole purpose is to instigate, is to be hurtful, is to cause pain. So counter protesters will show up to, you know, I'm thinking of the Westboro Baptist Church, which shows up at specifically painful emotional moments to cause more pain and to issue racial slurs and homophobic, transphobic slurs. And so expect not only to see them, but expect that that could be a really traumatic and painful interaction. Expect loud noises and crowds. Expect fireworks and other sound makers from demonstrators. So one of the things we want for people to think about, to expect, is that there are lots of loud sounds, and we'll talk about that a little bit later as we get into the agenda, but from authorities, but there are also really loud noises that can come from demonstrators and folks that we are in community with. And that could look like fireworks, sound makers. Sometimes there's a little bit of competition between speakers. There's maybe the major sound system, the main sound system, and also megaphones. So just being ready to expect loud noises from all around. Expect demonstrators to be taking part in actions you may or may not agree with. So we've talked about this a little bit, but just to, you know, pull away, and this is consistent with all of Frailty Myths work and workshops, is there is no monolith, there is no one way. So expect that there will be people taking part in actions that you may not agree with, that have a political ideology that you may not be totally in line with, and that both of those things can exist simultaneously. Expect that there might be confusion about what is happening, and there might not be centralized or clear leadership. Sometimes there might be clear leadership, but it's important to not expect that it will be really evident and really clear when you get out to the street, what's happening next, who's in charge. A lot of times there's things that are demonstrations are organized horizontally. There is no one in charge. That leadership is happening in a really distributed way. So it's important just not to manage your expectations around things like hierarchy and things like centralized leadership, and know that that might not be the case when you decide to go out. Sometimes demonstrations are just people who have gathered together really specifically without any kind of centralized leadership. Next on the expectation list, I see a little bit of stuff in the chat. We do have some of this written down. So we're working on putting together kind of a thing that we can post in each of these sections. So feel free to take notes, but we will share a written version of this out on our page after this session in a kind of, in a sectionized way. Sectionized, just making up words. It's okay, it's 2020. Expect that the police will escalate with or without cause. So the unfortunate reality of this world is that the police do not need cause to escalate or regularly escalate without it. And that escalation can look like tear gas, pepper spray, water cannons, other crowd control tactics. It can look like violence. It can look like running. And we're going to talk about that later on today, but just to be really clear that you should expect that police will escalate without cause. Police show up in a lot of different ways. Some cities, and it ranges from city to city, but generally you should expect police on horses, police in riot gear, and police that are heavily armed. The sad reality of the continued militarization of the police force across this country is increasingly evident as they kind of show off their military equipment. And we've seen that recently in the news, specifically in the last 2 weeks. With riot gear and the weaponry that the police force and the National Guard are carrying into peaceful demonstrations being increasingly heavy. Expect that your phone will not work, and this might be because you lose it, because you drop it, because you break it, or because the cell phone towers are jammed in a way that they're intentionally trying to stop communication. So it's good to have a backup plan. We'll talk about that a little bit later, but it's good to expect it. And then lastly, almost lastly in this section, do not expect to receive warnings to disperse prior to escalation or arrest. So like I said a second ago, it's good to expect that the police will escalate with or without cause. And similarly, it's good to go into it expecting or not expecting that you'll receive warnings or a dispersal warning prior to that escalation. So sometimes that happens, but again, it's good to prepare yourself. Even if they do give the warning, maybe you won't hear it. And so it's good to prepare yourself to react and be prepared in that instance. And then lastly, for this section, don't expect that if you do get arrested, don't expect that anything that you have confiscated, you'll get back. And we'll talk more a little bit about that later in the what to bring. But it's important to expect that you won't get your stuff back if it's been confiscated. I think I forgot to name the sections we're going to go over, so I'll do that and then we'll pause for a moment. So we'll see if we've got some questions here. What to bring, Erin's going to walk us through next, and then we'll talk about considerations, where we'll talk about things like your legal status, COVID-19, jail support, who we're centering, restrooms. So if you've got questions for that category, hold it till we get there. Then we're going to talk about some hot tips, things that we've learned from being in the streets. And we'll end with talking specifically about different common crowd dispersal methods that have been used in the streets for a long time, but that are particularly common right now. So it's a lot of information, like Erin said, and we'll do our best to work our way through that. So I'm going to pause. Erin, do you see questions in the chat specifically that we can answer?
I do. We got one here from Karen, my favorite Karen, my #1 favorite Karen in the world.
The Karen? The best.
Karen Spakian.
Oh, I love you.
Karen Spakian over on Facebook is watching, and she says, she has really, I think, a really poignant question that I think I've thought about a lot, and I think a lot of folks have thought about. So Karen asked, here's a question. I'm torn between exposure to COVID and my commitment to public anti-racism activities. If I decide to stay home, what can I do to support other than donate money? And you know how much I love demonstrations. And I think it's fair to vouch. I mean, I don't think that Karen needs us to vouch for us, but she does love her public demonstration. So ain't no party like a party with Karen, because the party don't stop.
Facts.
So I think this is a really, all kind of kidding aside, I think this is a really important question to ask. And I think I've struggled with this of like, my wife is on the front lines. Like she works with folks that are severely exposed to COVID, that have a higher risk of it than any other folks. And so I don't want to put anybody in a position where my privilege of like going out gets somebody that stick in a way that they can't get, you know, healthy from. A lot of people maybe have previous health conditions and can't. And so I think this is a really important question, Karen. I really appreciate you asking this. Recently, we made a nice little, a little picture, a little icon, a diagram, which shows some stuff, Karen, that you can do other than just going out to a protest. I'm gonna put the link to it in the box, but some other stuff you can do, Karen. And you said donating, so obviously you can do that. You can donate to bail funds. We'll talk about that. We've got a master list of bail funds that folks can donate to, but you can do all sorts of stuff. You can donate medical supplies. You can write blog posts. You can organize food in your community. You can babysit kids and pets while people go out to protest. You can offer to pick people up from hot zones. You can organize donations from your job, right? There's lots of things that you can do. You can write pieces online and blog posts and things like that to let people know what's going on. So lots of different ways to get involved if you can't go to a protest. I'll put the link in the comments so people can look at that and share. But not to worry if for some reason you can't come out, lots of ways that you can support.
Yeah, thanks, Karen. And we'll talk a little bit more about COVID in the what to consider section. And another thing that's really important that's also really, always needed is doing jail support from home. There always needs to be folks at home that are keeping track and being mindful of our homies that are out on the streets. And so you can sign up. There's whether it's working at an affinity group level or just with a group of your friends, you can be the person that keeps track of when people are home safe, making sure folks check in and keeping an eye out and organizing if folks do get arrested to help them get out. Any other questions? Did we see? So many chats. Okay, great. So we're just gonna keep moving because we've got 4 more sections of the hour. So Erin, I'll pass it over to you to do what to bring.
Perfect. This is exciting. This is quick. We'll go real quick through this because this is basically just a list. Time to bring out your pens, folks. Take a list. We got a little note. So here's some things that you should bring. Just some things to think about. This is not an exhaustive list, but just some tips. So for ID and money, if you have, you can speed up the process if you're arrested if you have your ID on you. So just so you know, if you bring identification with you, that will make that process quicker. If you want it to go slower, then there you go. Don't bring your ID. Bring $20 if you can on hand. If you can also bring change with you, that's really great. Obviously, it's a privilege to be able to have money with you, but if you can, please do it. If you can, bring your medical insurance card if you have one. And finally, do not bring your whole wallet. If you have a beautiful wallet that you love, now is not the time to bring it. Leave that at home. So you want to find yourself with cash, maybe some change, your ID, your medical ID, and that is it. Finally, obviously, Georgia was talking about it. We're going to talk about it a little bit more, but we still want to be really, really mindful of the fact that there is a global plague going on around us, and COVID-19 is real. It's real, y'all. So we need to make sure that folks are wearing masks out there. We will take down white supremacy, and we will stay healthy while we do it. That is the mandate. So everyone, N95 is recommended as a mask for COVID. I know everybody's got the cute cloth ones, but let's get an N95 mask that's actually going to keep you safe. Also, along with that, if you can bring with you a bandana or a scarf to cover along with your mask, that is not just for your protection from anything in the air, but that's also for identification purposes. So if you can bring with you an N95 mask and a bandana and a scarf with you. Finally, if you have any type of mask that filters organic vapors, those are the best for most common disbursement agents. You might see on TV the White House is dismissing the idea that there was pepper spray or tear gas that was being used because it was another chemical agent. The fact remains is that there are chemical agents in the air. Actually, unfortunately, a young woman just passed away from being in a crowd that had tear gas, and she had asthma and passed away a couple of days later from an asthma attack. So this is very serious, not just COVID, but also keeping your lungs safe right now. So N95 mask, a bandana and a scarf, and if you can bring any type of mask that has an organic vapor filter, that's the best kind. Finally, we want to make sure that we're bringing goggles and safety goggles with us because there's flying debris and also rubber bullets. Georgia's going to talk a little bit more about what exactly those things are, but there's lots of things in the air flying around, and you want to make sure that you've got protection on your eyes. Lots of folks have been losing eyes recently. Georgia, like I said, we'll talk a little bit more about that. Sealed goggles are preferable for protection. If you perhaps don't have, like you're not Georgia and you don't randomly have like 100 shot glasses just at your disposal or just randomly in your pocket, you can also find swim goggles. Those also are really great, or ski goggles. And ski goggles are great because they're not just great for protection, but they're also protecting from the sun. So two great options: swim goggles, ski goggles. And it is just for my glasses wearing, my eye folks, my eye limited people out there. It is not the time to wear your contacts. Glasses up. First of all, glasses are better. But secondly, we don't want to have contacts in our eye when we're coming up against irritants that are in the air. So now is not the time to wear your contacts. Glasses, for my glasses wearing folks, a lot of the glasses now are shatterproof. But just making sure you're not wearing glasses, like glass-made glasses, but you're wearing shatterproof plastic lenses like what most of us are wearing now. Finally, also, we want to make sure that our ears are protected because once the revolution ends, y'all, we still want to hear that beat slap. Still want to hear that beat slap. So please make sure that you are wearing either earplugs or earmuffs. I don't even wear earmuffs. I just got big old headphones that are I just look fly while you're doing it. It's totally fine. But you want to make sure that you're wearing something to protect your ears. Sound, Georgia's going to talk about this in another section, but sound is often a tactic that's used for disbursement. It is wildly uncomfortable having experienced it myself. So you want to make sure that your ears are as protected as possible. We always say this at Frailty Myths, but you are basically a complicated plant. So you need to make sure that you are giving yourself water all the time. So making sure that you bring water with you to any action that you go to is paramount. Not only is water great for you just to like feel good, just to keep moisturized, just to keep your skin glowing, but also because of the amount of irritants in the air, water is a great resource. If you don't have anything else on you, water is a great thing to use to rinse out your eyes. If you're ever feeling uncomfortable or a little worried, just literally the first thing you should do is drink a glass of water. That's just a tip. That's not even about the actions, y'all. That's just a life tip. If you have it, you want to make sure that you want to bring an external phone battery, something that can charge your battery. Georgia mentioned that your phone may not work. It may not work because of signals canceling, and it may not work because you forgot to charge it before you left. So external phone battery. I've done it. You want to make sure that you're bringing comfortable shoes, something that you can move quickly with if you need to. Clothes, in terms of clothes, you want to make sure that we're wearing clothes that are appropriate. Now is not the time to wear your flyest looks unless that's how you get down. Layer if you want to. Layer is what I always do, so you can make sure that you can adjust the temperatures. And also so that you can make sure that you're not showing off anything that's distinguishable as an individual, like tattoos and stuff like that. And finally, especially for my folks of color out there, because we forget about this, wear sunscreen. I know that we're beautiful and melanated, but all of us need to wear sunscreen. So make sure that you have sunscreen out there. And just know that any oil-based sunscreen and moisturizer can make the effect of tear gas, pepper spray, any kind of irritant in the air worse. So you're not looking to use any oil-based moisturizer or any oil-based moisturizers or sunscreens when you're going out to an action. I apologize if that was a little quick. If you have any questions, feel free to drop them in the chat. Georgia, do you want to hook people up with what they should consider before they go out to an action?
I do. Thanks for that. And just one other note on masks. If you don't have an N95 mask, we know a lot of places are sold out, that they can be hard to get. The CDC does say that a cloth mask is better than nothing. So there is that. And also, if you're having symptoms, please stay home. It's fine if you want to take risks with your own health, but like just be mindful of how you might be contaminating others. And we'll talk a little bit more about that right now. Is there anything we should not bring? I've heard protesters with backpacks that have been targeted. Yeah, so we'll talk a little bit about that in hot tips. Thanks, Justin. Yeah, you don't want to bring anything that you're going to be sad to lose. And we'll talk about, and I'll actually just come back to it a little bit later. We'll talk about like different ways that we think are best for your phone. And you basically want to go through the list that Erin just read off and think about what of those things that you need to take with you, how long are you going to be out, and what it's going to be like to carry a bunch of stuff around. And generally we want to try to travel as light as possible, but big kind of frames, don't take anything that you'd be super sad to lose. We'll talk about security culture in a moment, so I'll just wait on that. And not only stuff that you don't want to lose, but stuff that you might not get back. As far as being targeted, that's really hard to say. That's really hard to say because there's so many different people being targeted for so many different things. So that's, I think, really, really localized. Okay, things to consider. Local curfew. So I know a lot of the curfews have been lifted. But just to say, because this is the moment that we're in, and an interesting, historical note is the last time there was a curfew in New York was in the 40s when a white officer shot and killed a black soldier. So just a sad note of where we've come and haven't come. So if there's a curfew in place, peaceful protest is also not permitted. And so by going out, you are subject to being stopped and arrested. And that is not a value statement or a judgment on whether you decide to break curfew, just to say that obviously the police across this country are already not particularly accountable. And so the curfew is just an added layer of them having the ability to stop and arrest people without cause. So just a thing to consider based on your vulnerability. And we know that obviously there's a whole range of vulnerability there for different factors. Another thing to consider is COVID, your COVID vulnerability. So this is, like I said, if you are sick, please stay. If you're having symptoms, please stay home. We are in the middle of a unprecedented in our lifetime global pandemic, and it is real. 100,000 people have died in this country at least. And we know that it is disproportionately affecting Black and Brown communities in ways that, are profound across this country. So if you have a compromised immune system, you're also vulnerable. The elderly are vulnerable. So just consider that situation. We don't want to lose that consideration in this moment of resistance. Consider your immigration status, the unfortunate reality that depending on your immigration status will also can have other impacts on your life and your situation and how long you're held. So please consider that. Likewise, consider your legal status. So having a record or unresolved issues can result in longer hold times. That's not to say that it necessarily will. And it's not to say that if you don't have a record that you will not be held. It is just to say that your legal status can have an impact, and it's something that you should consider and seek guidance about if you have unresolved cases, because also being arrested, if you have unresolved cases, can impact those unresolved situations. So check with a lawyer. I am not a lawyer. Erin is not a lawyer. So we are not giving any legal advice, but please consider your legal status. That said, you should have, and we'll talk about this in hot tips, but have the contact information for your local NLG, which stands for National Lawyers Guild. They operate in most cities. Have their lawyer. There's also a lot of really dope local legal groups around. So just check with your homies, check with your fam about what legal groups are organizing. There's lots of resources online and lots of really beautiful, profound folks organizing around the legal world to support activists and support this moment and other revolutionary moments. Jail support, have a plan if you get arrested. So one of the things that we also want to hold in this moment and always is that we're taking care of ourselves and our communities, whatever that looks like. So we want to encourage people to have agency, and particularly for white folks, what it means to not be adding emotional or other kinds of labor on the backs of people who are already carrying the trauma of this moment and of so many moments and of systemic and state-sanctioned violence and institutional racism. So you having your own jail support plan is really important. We'll talk more about that in hot tips, but one of the things that you can do is make sure that someone who is not attending the event that you're going to has important information about you, about any medicine that you need, about people, if you get arrested, who they should call, things like that. And we'll talk about this more later, but having a time to say, Erin, I'm going to go to this rally. If I don't call you by 10 o'clock p.m., you call me, let's check in, maybe something has happened. And that'll help Erin know how she can support me in that moment. Ideally, it's someone that lives in the same city so they could come scoop you from jail if that's necessary, but that's not always possible. And for me, if it's something that happens last minute, I know Erin knows everything about me, knows how to get in touch with my family, knows where I live, knows my medication situation. So that's what's important, that we can take care of each other. Physical status, consider your physical status. Again, this is not judgment, like lots of folks with all kinds of different abilities out in the world. And just to know that sometimes in these moments and demonstrations, it can be a lot of walking. It can sometimes escalate into running. So consider how much walking and or running you're able to do and comfortable doing. That's not to say don't go, but maybe you want to consider where you place yourself in the crowd. If standing for long periods of time is hard for you, maybe you want to position yourself near a wall so that if people start running, you have something to lean against that can give you a little bit more protection. Just really being cognizant of your surroundings, mindful of the situation, and knowing that things can change very quickly, and putting yourself in the place where you'll be most safe and most protected. Some people are more vulnerable to the effects of tear gas than others. We're going to talk about tear gas and pepper spray at the end, but just to say, these are chemical agents that are made, that are created to cause pain. Tear gas is against the law in the Geneva Convention to be used during warfare. And it is used legally in this country against demonstrators. So for those of us who have skin sensitivities or respiratory sensitivities, we're at greater risk for tear gas and pepper spray specifically, and other chemical agents to have a greater impact. And not to say that everyone shouldn't be considerate of that, but if you have those sensitivities, just consider that as you make your decisions around placement and when and where to go and when and where to leave. Another thing to consider is how you react in crowds. Are you claustrophobic? You know, these are very emotional times. Demonstrating resistance, the police state, institutional racism, violence, police murder. These are already like very emotional, very intense things that folks are holding. And if you are trapped, if you're in a crowd, if you're claustrophobic, if you're feeling panicked, and then the police escalate, things can get really out of control. So for you, really think, like, I would encourage you to breathe in that moment, but also really think about, if you already don't feel great in crowds, just really be mindful of where you are in the demonstration and position yourself on the edge so that you can get out of the crowd if that's what you need to do to take care of you. We have access to a bathroom. Quickest way to end a protest demonstration is if you're cold, if you're uncomfortable, or if you have to pee. So think about how long you plan to be out. Some places right now, it's especially difficult because there are more places are closed due to Corona, due to the curfews. So places where you might have depended on to use the facilities before aren't going to be available right now. So that said, you can check your local social media, local groups. There's a lot of places that have opened their doors to demonstrators and protesters to use the bathroom. So that's something that you want to check on beforehand. There's all kinds of different, I'll call them devices, that allow you to use the restroom in a more mobile way. If that's your jam, you can check that out online, but have a plan, because it can be really uncomfortable in an already uncomfortable situation, and is a real thing. I'll touch quickly on the considerations that Erin mentioned at the top of the session, which is, who are you centering in your actions? So this is a thing that you should just keep considering. Do an action, take a breath, consider who you're centering. And consider how much space you're taking up. Consider if you should be the one with the megaphone. And we're not out here trying to police people's actions. We're not out here trying to tell you what to do or what to do. Maybe you are the person that should be holding the megaphone, but just really, really consider why you're there. And if you're there to fight for a more just world, if you're there to lift up the voices of Black folks who are fighting police brutality, police murder, and you're not Black, maybe you shouldn't be the one with the megaphone. I don't know, because I'm not you and I'm not there, but consider that. And really, like Erin mentioned, come when called, but also respect that people have agency, respect that we're not like, if your tendency, or if you're feeling very paternalistic, for example, maybe check that and just say, am I acting because someone has asked me to do something? Like, you don't need to throw your body, don't pick up a sword that no one has asked you to carry. And similarly, consider whose leadership you're following. So there is leadership out there to be followed. You don't have to follow it. Maybe, no masters, no gods. We're about that life too, but just really think about who you're following and what that looks like in the moment. And if that moment is the right place for you, maybe it's not. You can respect someone's call for nonviolence, even if you disagree ideologically, and maybe find a different moment to express your strategic political principles. Filming, be mindful of whom you're filming and photographing. Some people don't want to be filmed. It can be dangerous for people to have their face on the internet. So just please practice good consent, consider what it looks like, consider potential consequences for you or the people you're filming. There's options to blur people's faces out if that's a thing you're capable of. And then also be mindful of the tone. You know, if you are really filming a lot, like if you're coming off as a spectator or kind of like observant rather than a participant, just be mindful of it. It can be triggering for some folks. And again, always never shy away from consent. We really try to lift up consent culture all around at Frailty Myths. Conversely, if you see cops doing fuck shit, film them, always film them, or other authorities. It's, you know, we have a real dearth of accountability in this country, in this forever. And so it doesn't hurt to have more footage than less footage. And the last consideration, you know, I think it's beautiful to see young folks, to see children out in the streets, and just to overlay that consideration in what you do. If you're accompanied by children, if you got kids with you, just think about how, you know, what a crowd might be like for them and how they're, and, you know, and just being mindful of the different ways that it impacts kids. And I'll just share something that was shared on a community call I was on yesterday about rage, which was, you know, we have it, some people are out here expressing like are making a strategic decision around property destruction, and that's one thing. And the other folks, there's a lot of youth that are angry, and maybe they just have never been, and they're out here expressing that anger in a way that, you know, like we can try to hold them and bring them in rather than condemn them for that righteous anger wherever it comes from. And so just food for thought that our inclination to condemn in any moment that there are other options. You know, there's another way that we can hold, especially our young people who are acting out of a deeply rooted anger that maybe they don't have words for, or they haven't been in community in a way that they can develop that into a strategic politic yet, whatever that looks like. And so I will pause. Do we got any questions, Aaron?
Yeah, we got a few questions. I don't know if we hit Justin's question on the stack from earlier. He had asked if we knew of any organizations that are helping to provide supplies to protesters, like eye equipment. I don't know if you want to answer that. You want to go ahead?
Well, I think it depends on where you're at. I will say that if you're, you know, like I can say for Oakland, there's generally, if you follow the Anti-Police Terror Project on Facebook is a really good resource. There's a lot of resources that will say where there are drop-offs for a given demonstration. I don't know of kind of like one group that is offering like as maintaining a drop-off site for those kinds of things. But generally, if there's a demonstration called, you can bring that shit and there will be someone that will collect it and help distribute it.
All right, and then we got one more question from the folks on Facebook. And it was, what's the best way to find out where and when protests are planned? Twitter has some information, but it's kind of hard to sift through.
Yeah, that's also a great question. And it also really depends on where you are. And, you know, there's so many different groups and so many different groups, so many different people planning protests and rallies and demonstrations in this moment. And so if you're not already plugged into affinity groups, you know, I would, you can kind of like, I would look on social media, but also whatever your, like what if your desire to go demonstrate is specifically around George Floyd, then you can look specifically for that. If you're trying to kind of generally lift up the movement for Black lives, then, you know, the movement for Black lives is a great resource, depending on what's like, that can direct you to different organizations, depending on what city you're in. So yeah, it's so location based that it's hard. There is no kind of centralized, this is where you go to find out the digs on protests.
Yeah. I think the only thing to add to what Georgia said, I've had the opportunity to move to a different place a number of times and trying to kind of reconnect and build community. And I think the idea of like finding what you find valuable, like you said, Georgia, like, yo, I'm really into soccer. Great. Go meet folks that are into soccer and talk about how systemic racism impacts you and go out with your team and go protest, right? You don't necessarily need to be connected to like an actual like, oh, we're a radical group to go do radical stuff, right? You just need to be with your friends and be awesome. One of the things that I can't help with, one of the things we just put up on our Facebook page, we've got a master list of about 76 different bail funds that are all around the United States that are bailing out activists. And the reason why I think this might be helpful is that a lot of the funds are being, almost all of the funds, if not all of the funds, are run by local groups that have been doing work in the community since prior to these current actions right now over the past couple of weeks. So that's why they have websites, that's why they have Venmos, that's why they have cash apps, right? Because they've already been doing this work for years and years and years in their local communities. And so I'll share that list. And for the person that asked that question, I'd recommend find where you're based. Find the group that's hosting the bail fund and go talk to them. They'll be a great first step in finding other folks in your community that are interested in what's going on. But really great question. Really hard to move somewhere, really hard to meet new people, especially when the resistance is happening. So good on you, great question. Hey, Georgia, can we move real quick into just hot tips?
Let's move to hot tips.
Love it. All right, my number one hot tip. These are all hot tips. I wish I had that flame emoji behind me. But the number one.
I'm gonna make you one out of cardboard.
Plan your exit, y'all. The easiest way to plan your exit is to think about your exit when you enter. So when you are walking into an action, think about how you could get out of that action. Be observant, be mindful, and think about how you can leave. And then once you've established in your mind what your exit plan is, share that with your friends. Establish a meeting place where you'll meet up if you get separated. Pick a time that you'll meet up in that place and allocate that responsibility to your tallest of friends to make sure that they will be there so that you may see them as a beacon of hope as you leave safely from the action. So make sure that you plan your exit. You tell folks where you're going to go, and you and your friends plan where we're going to meet, when we're going to meet, and how we're going to get there. Finally, also, you want to make sure that you tell a friend that's not going. So for Karen, for that question out there, what's one of the things that we can do if we're not going to the protest? Not only can you bail watch and jail watch for folks after they've been arrested, but you can also be an emergency plan for folks that don't get arrested, but just need to make sure that they know, someone knows where they are. So for example, I know where Georgia is. I will drive to wherever she is and save her if you touch her hair on her body. But make sure that you have an exit plan. Make sure you tell a friend who's not going, and make sure you decide a time to check. And write an emergency number on your body. Georgia talked about this, maybe the number to your local National Lawyers Guild. That's an incredible group of folks all over the United States that are lawyers that volunteer their times to go to protest and make sure that if and when rights are violated, that they are there to observe that and make sure that folks get out of jail safely. So write the number to your local NLG or an emergency number on your body. Great tip from Georgia. Make sure that you write that number in a space that you don't mind other people seeing. If you're ready to show the abs off, put it on the abs. But if not, maybe the forearm's a better place. No judgment. Put it out wherever you want. But just make sure it's a place where you don't mind other people seeing you, because you might be showing it, looking for it when you're in jail. Georgia already mentioned this. Before I forget, I'm sorry. Before I move on too quickly, write it with a marker that doesn't rub off. I've made that mistake. Don't write with dry erase markers. That's not how that works. So make sure you're writing with a marker that's permanent, that can get wet, things like that. Finally, Georgia already mentioned this, but make sure that you don't take anything that you'll be super sad to lose. If you're choosing between an ID or a passport, pick the ID. So just make sure that you don't want to have anything that you might lose. Check your phone and make sure that you remove any sensitive information. You don't want anything on your phone that you don't want anybody seeing. All right. So now's the time to delete all those awkward texts, right? Also making sure that you take off anything on your phone. So just so you know, if your phone is set up for your thumb and for your face, different parts of the country, the police can actually ask you to unlock that. And so you want to take off any biometrics that are on your phone. So that's the thumb entry on your iPhone. I don't have an Android, so I don't know what y'all do, but I assume there's some biometric thing. So take whatever that weird thing that's making my phone have green text off of your phone. So make sure that you don't have any biometric stuff on your phone. You also want to make sure that your phone's password protected. That's not a protest tip. That's a life tip. Password protect your phone. Yeah. And finally, I always tell people this, but just in general, internet practices, if you can use a VPN, that's a virtual private network, that makes sure that it signals or changes your IP address so folks can't track you versus the address of your computer. And this was something that we had in a question of kind of what to bring, what not to bring about backpacks. You want to travel as light as possible. So if you don't need it, don't need it. Someone has a question in here, Georgia, about burner phones, which is also in kind of the hot tip space. I'm not a fan of burner phones. because I feel like I forget the phone number that is the phone, and then I've deleted the purpose of the, I'm just forgetful. But we have a question from Vita here, Georgia. What do you think about burner phones? Are there cheap ones?
Yeah, the category of burner phones, I think it really kind of depends on what you are doing and what your security culture is with the group that you're operating kind of as a part of. So and it depends on what your concern is, because another thing you can do with your regular phone is you can back it up, you can wipe it, you can return it to factory settings, and then you can re-upload all your stuff when you come home. And that essentially is using a burner phone. If you want to not take, if you want to take a cheaper phone, then that is definitely available. You can buy cheaper phones. I will say what has come up a number of times with burner phones is that people forget to program important numbers into the burner phone before they go out, and then they don't have numbers. They don't have the numbers they need. They don't remember any numbers. I only know 2 numbers, I think, by memory at this point in my life. So I think if you're operating in a really secure situation and you really don't want to lose your phone, for example, then burner phones are a great option. It just, like I said, it really depends, and you want to make sure that that phone is prepped before you go out. And the last thing I'll say about burner phones is, whatever your security culture is, if you have a burner phone, you still want to be really mindful about not keeping sensitive information on that phone that can be used against you or someone else, or can be used for charges around conspiracy, for example, if that phone does get confiscated and end up in the hands of police. So it's just something to be mindful of. Security culture is really important. And it depends on what you're doing. I hope that answered the question on burner phones. I'm going to keep going. We're at time. I'm just going to touch on crowd control methods. So thanks for folks that are able to stay, and happy to keep going with questions and go a little bit longer if people have them. So, and just to name this next section, it's heavy. Erin and I always, like I said at the beginning, try to find joy and love and some humor, and to say that this is a serious moment, in that, we are talking about tragedy. We are talking about deeply rooted racism and deeply rooted violence that impacts people every single moment of their lives. And this next section, we're going to talk about common crowd dispersal methods that cause pain, that cause death, that cause fear, that have been used to terrorize communities, particularly communities of color, for a very long time. So, and it's a lot of information. So just like I said, like we'll keep saying, we're Frailty Myths, and our revolutionary practice is to try to hold all of those things at once, but root into love and joy as we move in these kind of more difficult emotional spaces, and lift up that vulnerability and lift up that struggle. So the first thing we'll talk about is tear gas and pepper spray. Interestingly enough, tear gas, not a gas at all. It's an aerosol. So it's a powder that's aerosolized when it's distributed, which is just, I think, important to know, so that it can help you understand how it sits on your skin and on your clothes, and why it's important to, if you do get exposed, change your clothes, put them in a bag, wash them, get it off you as soon as possible. Tear gas and pepper spray can both be sprayed from small handheld dispensers, like mace, or kind of larger fire extinguisher sized tanks. Tear gas is most commonly deployed via canister. Sometimes they're fired into crowds, sometimes with a kind of like a beanbag gun where they can fire 2, 3, 4 canisters at a time. Sometimes they're more lobbed one at a time into crowds, but they're also sometimes pointed directly at people. So just to be really clear, that both tear gas and pepper spray canisters are used to disperse a chemical agent that is both painful and dangerous, but also the canister themselves are used as projectiles and blunt objects that can also cause a significant amount of pain. Specifically, one of the ways that pepper gas canisters are sometimes fired is they're fired in like plastic projectiles directly at the chest, So they hit people in the chest, which causes people to take a deep breath and then inhale all of the chemical agent that will cause an even more severe reaction. If you, as there's lots of photos of this, if you've seen people pick up tear gas canisters and throw them. I will leave it at that. But just to say, sometimes those tear gas canisters can be very, very, very hot. And if you do that, you are also exposing yourself to a lot more of the chemical agent. And, you know, at Frailty Myths, like, we are really working to build a world without toxic masculinity. And so I just want to name here that it doesn't make it, it's not cooler or more badass or more powerful or more down to intentionally expose yourself unnecessarily to any of these toxic chemicals. It's one thing if someone has asked you, if you're a white ally, for example, to be more willing to put yourself at risk because of the disproportionate way that authorities escalate. But just be mindful of that. Like, we're really trying to reject this kind of idea of heroism in that way. So yes, oftentimes firing tear gas makes a loud popping sound followed by the sound of canisters flying through the air. It can be really disorienting. There's often sparks. It sounds like a gun. It is scary, and it is fear immediately followed by a chemical agent being dispersed. It often means at that point, lots of people are running. So it can be really chaotic, a really chaotic situation. What I will say about getting out of this situation is, if you've been exposed to tear gas or pepper spray, there's very little known about the actual chemicals that are being used. And those chemicals change from police force to police force, from day to day, even within the same activity. There's two chemicals that are really common, but that's not to say that they're the only one. So the different solutions that you'll see on the streets, and this is, you know, the street medics that are out there are beautiful, profound forces of good that are holding our communities across the world. And just to say that it's difficult to know exactly, there's a lot of different formulas for solutions to deal with tear gas. Generally, and in my personal experience, I can say that more base solutions on the pH scale have and can alleviate some of the immediate pain. That being said, please be really careful not to put contaminated water or spoiled milk or anything that might be contaminated in your eyes or in your mouth. There's a lot of solutions of milk of magnesia or water and antacid that, like I said, can alleviate some of the pain, but be careful. Full stop, end of the day. Getting out of the area and washing your face with fresh water is the safest thing that you can do, if you are in any doubt. I'm going to run through the rest of these pretty quickly. Concussion grenades, flashbangs. Concussion grenades and flashbangs are painfully loud noises, generally accompanied by a very loud flash. It's unclear often where they're coming from because they are so loud. But to be very clear, it is not sound used to make you disperse as a warning. It is sound that is meant to cause pain. So like tear gas and pepper spray, these agents are meant to cause pain, and that it is the pain getting you to disperse. They're disorienting, they cause panic, they're scary, and they're very, very painfully loud. So Aaron spoke about the importance of earmuffs and ear protection. So we've seen flashbangs used a lot recently, and a lot of times they are the first tactic used, immediately followed by some of these other tactics that we've talked about. Rubber bullets, scary bullets, come from a gun. It's a bit of a misnomer. They're sometimes made of rubber, they're sometimes made of wood, they're sometimes made of plastic. They hurt a lot. They are in this category of kind of non-lethal, less than lethal, but it's kind of like less lethal than like an actual gun. But that is to say, they are expected to produce contusions, abrasions, bruising, and hurt you, but in many cases also cause fractures. They can cause injuries to internal organs and have it cause death. Aaron mentioned this earlier, but in a very somber note to all of our relatives in Chile, who the authorities there in the last 2 years were shooting rubber bullets point blank at protesters' eyes and had intentionally blinded over 200 demonstrators. So it's a real thing. An LRAD is a common military, it's a long range acoustic device. It was developed to send messages and warning tones over long distances. So unlike concussion grenades and tear gas, which were made for the purpose of hurting us, the LRAD was not, but is subsequently used as such. So that's what it is. It's often kind of paraded around in like a van or a truck. It oftentimes gives a countdown in a weird robot voice. It's very loud. It's way more effective in urban areas with buildings, works less well if you're in like the plains where the sound doesn't have anything to bounce off of. So when they were using it in Standing Rock, for example, the sound kind of just dissipated and it wasn't particularly painful, which irritated them and made them use other really painful, dangerous tactics. But so just another one. The next common and super dangerous tactic that police use to disperse crowds are water canyons. This is highly pressurized water shot with either water cannons or fire hose. So pressurized water is often strong enough to knock you over. Pressurized water also sometimes carries little bits of debris that can tear your skin. And then if you are wet, your body loses heat at much, much, much higher rates. So if you were in a cold place, being wet can cause hypothermia, in addition to panic and fear and reactivating the chemical agents that are already being distributed. So it's a really chaotic, scary situation. One night in Standing Rock, for example, they opened up water cannons on a group of peaceful demonstrators, and over 130 people ended up with hypothermia. And the last thing I'll mention, and just recognizing we're 10 minutes over, is kettling, which is a police tactic that often involves police officers kind of intentionally positioning themselves either on foot or with their horses or motorcycles all around the demonstration, kind of slowly moving in, and then at a certain point running toward the protesters to enclose and entrap a group of protesters in a place where they can't get out, and then issue mass arrests or increase violence. And it is a really scary thing. And so it's a common tactic in that moment. Think about, it's a good thing to consider before you go out. So when it happens, whenever you feel the inclination to run, really take a deep breath. We at Frailty Myths, breathing is one of the things we just always go back to. Take a deep breath, try to ground yourself in the moment, and then make a decision about what is best for you to do. I've heard people say when it comes to kettling, try to be like water and kind of slide out if you're trying to get out. But always be really mindful when you're running. It usually escalates the situation and can be really scary. So I will stop. Those are the things that we have. Happy to answer questions. Erin, if you have anything to add specifically.
Sure. We got a great comment from Karen with a resource from the Electronic Frontier Foundation on. I wrote Electron because I was typing quickly, but electronic device protection. So folks that are interested, the EFF is an incredible organization that works on privacy and protection of rights online. And they published a guide on how to keep your phone safe when you're going at a protest. So I just put that in the chat. Finally, just to wrap up, just like I said, we're a 501c3, we're a POC-run nonprofit. We are founded and operated as women, as folks of color, as queer folks operating within the community to try to transform the community from within. With that being said, we need more foundation, we need more donations, we need more support to be able to make stuff like this happen. So please, if you can give, I'll put Frailty Myths, Georgia, maybe you can drop our website where people can give to donate. You can go to our website to find more information about us. We are also on social media, on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, everything but TikTok. I'm 36 and I'm too grown for that. But please, also, this is really the time where we can be going to our work and leveraging our work dollars. So I know lots of employers do matching funds for donations, 501c3s. This is a great time to really push our dollars towards building the community that we want to see. We will continue to do more of these and continue to publish more resources for folks to use to stay safe and to come as their whole and true selves to these actions and to transform the world around us. We are powered by two things: an overwhelming desire to change the world and just some friendship shit. So if any of that, if you're interested in what we're doing, if you're interested in getting involved, interested in bringing us to not just your community for a workshop, but into your workplace where we spend most of our time, to transform those places into places that take racism seriously, that center it, and that work to not only be transformative in the way that we spend our dollars, but the way in which we treat each other in the workplace. Frailty Myths is ready and willing to do that. So please email us at info@frailtymyths.org. Don't worry, because we can't fly there. Zoom works. We're talking right now on Zoom. So not to worry, we can talk to you. We'll send a little telegram if we need to. We'll get to you. Thank you everyone for joining. If this was something that you're into, please make sure that you share our info. Like I said, we'll be doing more, so be on the lookout for that. Georgia, you got anything you want to say before we get out of here on a Friday?
No, just, you know, thanks for everyone who's interested in going out into the streets. And, you know, it's a powerful moment, and, you know, and we're excited about what we're building together as community, and excited about what, you know, the imagination and the hope of what we can replace some of these toxic and oppressive structures with once they fall. So I appreciate all the folks watching and all of our fam that are part of that project and that revolutionary practice. And I think it's really powerful. So if you've got questions after this, let us know. We'll work on that graphic to get it up in a written form for those who learn better by reading. That is on our list for the weekend. And yeah, mad love and mad appreciation to everyone who joined us today, and stay in touch, please.
Thank you. Bye. Goodbye. Goodbye.
We need to get our
theme music. Oh my God. Y'all, as you're leaving, just know that we have theme music. Let that take you out.
Bye. I love y'all.
Thank you, everyone.